Hi everyone, we'll have the customary few minutes for folks to arrive. Hopefully we're all caught up with the fact that we're going to have the DBOM presentation today, so mostly just a special guest session. Yeah, I'm hoping, I was in contact with the folks late last week, so Mehdi should be along to talk to us fairly soon.
John, this is Dick Brooks. I'm wondering, are there any plans to have a hackathon at the IETF 118 meeting?
So that's the detailed focus of, I think we're hoping for another special guest presentation next week, and then the rest of the interims are all focused around exactly that topic. So right now, without any further inspiration, what I think we need to do, what we agreed a few weeks ago, is that we need to get the interoperable bits of feeds worked out, because we couldn't go beyond what we did last time, I think, without having some kind of agreement on what the locator is actually going to look like. So the feed structure is our sort of technical fodder for what we're trying to work out in this period between 117 and 118, and I'm hopeful and, dare I say, a little bit confident that we'll come to a conclusion on that. So that the plan is to demonstrate that and get feeds properly integrated into the emulator. But of course, we're always open to different ideas. It's early enough to change course if something more compelling comes along.
So when you refer to the locator, are you referring to the material that a issuer would provide to an interested party who wants to retrieve material that they've posted into a registry?
A little bit, yeah. So I think the reason why we landed on feed structure is the words that I think we used, is that we want to work out the correct minimal interoperability that's required to have portable receipts. You need to know, potentially, if you've got one in your hand, you need to know where it came from, and the DIDs go a long way to doing that. But I think we found numerous things, including your use case there of finding or indexing receipts from a transparency service, where actually it's really important to understand what you're looking at in the feed, and indeed how a client knows what feed to put into the protected header to refer to their artifact in the first place. So yeah, it's not going to be all indexing and searching. I think we will always have a bit of a tension about where we draw the line between the data and integrity layer and a sort of semantically cognizant application layer. So we probably won't answer absolutely all of those questions, but this is the most fundamental one that I think unlocks that capability. I think we're all agreed that in some way the services need to be able to index and find stuff. Otherwise, it's a bit tricky to bootstrap their use.
Thank you, John. Yeah, I can say that the material that you provided during the Hackfest in San Francisco, which was a link to a posted artifact, worked extremely well. We had no problem at all accessing that material. So thanks very much.
Yeah, good. Thanks, Dick. So I'm hopeful that what we'll do essentially is to standardize that. There is a good way of making that interoperable, because there's one element of what I gave you is vendor specific to my company, and we want to try and break that and make it fully portable, which I think we can do. So a good target.
Thanks, John. I think that would be very beneficial to address that as a high priority. Thank you.
Great. Okay, so that's good. Thank you. So with no further ado, thanks for the intervention, Dick. We can. Amit is asking for screen sharing, so I assume, Amit, you're going to present on behalf of DBOM? If it comes up.
hitting the unmute button. Not used to Meet Echo.
There we go. Yep, we can hear you. So yeah, just for people who weren't aware or didn't know what's going on, we are looking, we as a community obviously are looking for interoperability, for sharing stuff, for learning from each other. So a number of us here, I think, are quite familiar with the DBOM project, but a number won't be. And yeah, we're really looking forward to learning about the state of where you guys are at. Certainly interested to see if there's any area for collaboration where the building blocks we're creating here would be useful to directly to DBOM or to customers of DBOM or to adjacencies to it. And yeah, just try and share our mission. I think we're all trying to make the world a better place and a safer place and a more transparent place. So yeah, take it away. We're looking forward to it. You've got about half an hour, maybe even a little bit longer. So yeah, take your time.
That should be plenty. So I'll just get started. So today we'll just look at how we see the software supply chain ecosystem, the secure software supply chain ecosystem, just so that we have a common understanding of the assumptions that we've made, etc. I will briefly go through the DBOM architecture, not too much of a technical deep dive, just enough to further the conversation. We'll look at some of the use cases that we've tackled in the past so that you can see where that architecture is actually applied. And we have a few high-level suggestions on how DBOM and SCITT could interoperate, could help each other. Again, via very cursory examination of what's out there on the SCITT documentation as well as repositories. So these are the questions that we see folks asking around the software supply chain security scenario. You have proactive questions. It's basically, do I really know what I'm running? Figuring out those key projects that's maintained by one or two maintainers on GitHub somewhere, and they are a key dependency to a lot of your infrastructure, and could also be a big spot for security vulnerabilities. There are operational questions. Okay, you've taken all these tools, you're running them in your environments. Do all the dependencies of those components also satisfy the security checks that you have? Do they have the right provenance? Do you have guarantees on how that artifact was created? Do you have guarantees on whether there are any open critical vulnerabilities? All those sorts of questions. And then finally, last but never the least, you have the reactive questions, right? There's a big exploit, something like Log4Shell or Heartbleed or like something as bad as SolarWinds. In the case that unfortunately happens, what should I be protecting? What things should I be looking at patching? What should I be putting behind the firewall? What should I be taking down if it's not critical? All those questions. Now, let's say you're in that last case. If you find products that are at risk, it's currently very much an ad hoc approach. Certain vendors do have very well thought out support portals. For example, maybe VMware, right? Like they have a very good place where you can subscribe to changes, subscribe to various security advisories, be notified based on the products that you've bought, etc. But that's not really true for most of the industry, at least from what we've seen. And if there's no security advisory, you have to go ahead and ask the vendor. And you either create a support ticket, or in more ad hoc cases, if you're working with a more smaller SMB startup type deal, you're essentially sending over an email and waiting for that email to be followed up on. Simultaneously, your security teams being proactive, you would conduct your own investigation, figure out if you're actually affected. Again, takes a lot of the time that your SecOps professionals are putting in. Additionally, you have, in a lot of cases, unless it's source available or open source, you don't have access to vendor code. So you can't really pinpoint where the vulnerability is or have a quick check across all your deployments. And this could be at multiple levels. It couldn't, if it's the product that you bought, okay, great, that's somewhat simpler. But imagine if it's in a deep dependency and you have to figure out what products even have those dependencies in play, which again exponentially makes it more difficult. when it comes to figuring out where these defects are. So when we think of the end-to-end secure software supply chain, again, this is the perspective from the digital bill of materials team, is that there's a certain set of people developing software. The artifacts are produced in a secure, trustable, and reproducible manner as part of a CI/CD pipeline. Of course, reproducibility is hard to get at, but that's why we have things like Salsa, right, to figure out which level of security we're at. While producing these artifacts, we simultaneously produce attestations. Attestations could include software dependency attestations like SBOMs. You could have stuff like VEX and BDRs that can be filed against those software dependencies. You could have a signed checksum of all the artifacts that are produced, possibly identity-related information around the build machine, the build infrastructure, as well as the provider, and attestation for the processes in line as well, similar to what we do with in Toto. And then finally, at the client side, we have a lot of automation in place. So these attestations are not things that humans have to handle ideally. There's something that is automatically handled by a policy infrastructure that goes in, that's reactive. Whenever we have vulnerability, it automatically takes steps. It highlights it in SCM, stuff like that. So that's what we consider to be an end-to-end secure software supply chain. Now, if we put it down on 4 different blocks, and again, I know these blocks can be split up in many ways, right, depending on how we look at the problem. So this is just one way of splitting them up. So there's the generation side, right? Like you have tools that generate these attestations. It could be stuff like Cosign, right, from the Sigstore ecosystem that generates OCI compliant logs on the fact that that container was created. It could be SBOMs, like the SBOM generators from Microsoft, from the SPDX teams themselves, Cyclone DX. You have tools like Intoto that creates attestations across the chain that you can publish and verify that every step has been verified and signed. And there are vulnerability reports that various tools allow you to create, sometimes even based on upstream vulnerability information. Let's say you depend on OpenSSL, and your product uses OpenSSL, you create a vulnerability report for your product saying that I have OpenSSL so-and-so, I have this vulnerability, and this is the patch. Then once you generate all those things, that's a lot of reports, that's a lot of attestations. You need a way to store and organize them, a way to sort of version them, send them out, and figure out the relations between these pieces, right? Vulnerability reports don't exist on their own. They're related to specific software. And here there are a lot of issues around namespacing. How do you reference an artifact? How do you reference an attestation? How do you figure out that this attestation is actually created by the right person, whether it's forged, any of that sort? I believe we have a hand up, Charles.
Just dealing with Meet Echo's muting situation. So on the attestation versus the artifact, in this case, is the SBOM itself an attestation or is it an artifact?
It is an attestation.
Attestation. Okay. Yeah. So we're having some discussions about the data and where it should go in SCITT, and it sounds like you are storing that as a matter of course in your or you're making a provision for that within DBOM.
Yep, and I'm sort of jumping the gun here, but we've sort of separated out like the notary piece and the attestation storage piece. So it may just be that we're using different terms to refer to the same set of things. So it may be more clear once we run through the architecture.
I'm trying to get my head around some concepts in SCITT and where the data is, where that where the SBOM is, I guess, is the crux of the matter. And I don't know if we've quite solved that yet, but that's useful info. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Charles. So the third block is the policy-based internal and external sharing and the whole authorization piece, right? If you have open source software, this is not really hard. I mean, you throw it in your GitHub Actions CI. It's released along with every single release. Anyone can download it. and use those attestations. If you're publishing it to a container registry, you have things like OCI tag, like the OCI metadata field, where you can store stuff alongside the artifact. However, if you get to the realm of proprietary software, the distribution story isn't that stellar. It's not a single source. You have various vendors across the board. Some of them exposing their internal artifact repositories. Some of them having various download sites. Essentially, it's not. There's no uniform way to share that attestation. And when you're dealing with vulnerabilities and vulnerability disclosures, and even SBOMs to some extent, those are all artifacts that could potentially be used as a way to figure out how your software works, figure out a possible vulnerability. And in the case of vulnerability disclosures, if the disclosure gets into the wrong hands, before it's remediated in critical downstream customers, you could have bad actors misusing that. So you need a way to sort of permission that, make sure that it's only read by the right set of people. And when you look at a supply chain, you have multiple layers, right? Like you have upstream and you have several downstreams, and that makes it difficult to spread it out across the downstream. So it's not just your immediate customer that might need to know about that. Maybe they're making a product around whatever you deliver, and they're giving it again downstream. So it's difficult to get that connectivity and to make sure that that information is flowing. And even when the information does flow, you need to be able to consume it from one place. You're not running like 10 different CMs, right? Like you'll have a single place where you're handling all your security remediations, your tracking and all that. And you want to be able to ingest all that data into one place with a uniform format. Finally, all of this data means nothing if it cannot be trusted. And that's where the validate and build trust piece comes in. So as we're receiving SBOMs, as we're receiving vulnerability information, it's important that that data is notarized, that data is signed by the appropriate parties without having to trust the party themselves. So make sure that a record of that attestation being created exists. Make sure that it's the right identity creating those attestations and not a malicious actor. So those are the pieces. Now, there's no one solution that can fix all of this. If anyone tried making that, I don't think it would really pan out, right? Because this is such a vast problem space. But DBOM can help here. It's not going to solve all of your problems in these areas, but it is going to focus on a very specific piece of it, which is storage, dispersal in the sense of transport, as well as a common framework to perform notarization, as well as integrate, as well as sort of give you an event bus that you can integrate into so that other products can consume these attestations. Now, how is this whole thing architected? Now, if I were to describe DBOM in a sentence, it's an open source, decentralized, federation-based solution to bring uniformity, automation, security, and auditability to any sort of attestation. In this case, we're just highlighting SBOM vulnerability attestations. And this is a Linux Foundation project. It's been handed over. Everything is open source. And right now, this is what the architecture looks like. Essentially, if you've ever used something like Mastodon or any of the Fediverse social networks, it's very similar, where everyone hosts their own DBOM node. Each DBOM node is a set of microservices. In this case, you can see that there is a service called the gateway that acts as a mediator to everything, and that's a single point of contact for the end user. And we can ignore the stuff inside. That's all the implementation details that allow you to create channels, connect to channels, etc. Each DBOM node has a repository, and the repository stores all the information. So going back to that question on where is the SBOM stored, right? Let's say Unisys is running a DBOM node at attestation1.nodes.unisys.com, right? It's the DBOM node, it's the repository under the DBOM node that is storing the SBOM. Simultaneously, as things are stored and updated and version controlled on the repository, it is simultaneously notarized to one or more public or private notaries. Let's say Sigstore, for example, if the public record instance as an example, a blockchain like Ethereum, something as simple as a transparency log, or could even just be a shared database. That doesn't really matter, but something that multiple parties can trust. DBOM nodes themselves talk to other DBOM nodes via the Federation API. So let's say I want to get attestations from Dell. So Dell just says that, oh, here's a channel. Here's a channel. This contains all the SBOMs for the products that you're buying. And Unisys' DBOM node can use its identity to go ahead and connect to Dell's channel, very similar to how you'd share a file on Google Drive, and get access to that stream of data. And it can be notified whenever there's a new SBOM available, when SBOM changes. And while you're accessing all this, you can ensure that every single attestation that comes out is verifiable against both the notary as well as the signatures of the remote DBOM node. Dick, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, hi, Amit. Dick Burks, Reliable Energy Analytics. So my question has to do with the repository concept. It says only one. Does that indicate that each DBOM node has its own repository information it's collected, or are DBOM nodes sharing information within their repositories with other DBOM nodes? Thanks.
So two things there. By default, every DBOM node has its own repository. So let's say I'm Unisys and I'm putting out an SBOM. I own that SBOM. The data lies with me until it is accessed or streamed out by another DBOM node. However, DBOM nodes can also work in a mirroring sort of mode where it can replicate all the data available in remote channel as well as essentially a remote DBOM node. So in the cases that you have access to that data, even when the remote DBOM node is down. Again, that's not part of the V2 implementation yet, but it is a piece of it.
Okay, thank you. And does that also mean that there's a public access to these repositories? So let's say, for example, there's an attestation on a cybersecurity label that you want to make public. Is that also an option here where you could have public access to the repository?
So similar to how you can make stuff on IPFS public, right? You could have a web-based access mechanism that still sits on top of the gateway, and that's where the integrations come in, right? That allow you to publish specific attestations on specific channels.
Thank you, Amit. I appreciate you disclosing the information. Thank you.
Thank you, and nice to see you after a long time. I think it's been a while. Ray?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the presentation. Going along with what Dick was asking, in terms of the repository, is the concept that you're working with that all of the data artifacts that you're securing here are placed in the repository, or do you support external repositories if it's very large data? So let's say we have a terabyte of data that we'd like to secure. Is it the concept that we would have to move that all into the local repository, or do you support that external mode? Thank you.
So in the case that you're interfacing to something that already exists, so that's where the repository agent comes in, right? And that's why it's a separate microservice away from all of the other pieces. The agent has a very specific surface area, essentially an API contract with the rest of the microservices. So if let's say you have like a large worth of data in a proprietary database somewhere, if you create a repository agent following the same sets of the same API as what the rest of the DBOM ecosystem expects, you can use that as a repository. For bespoke use cases where you have large data or where it's infeasible to move to a repository that we already support.
I mean, what if the data is not owned by you and it is actually maintained by somebody else, and you want to, but you're using it? So it's a lot of data. You don't want to have to move it around. It exists somewhere else, and you want to just refer to it. Is that supported?
I think maybe unmuted.
Yeah, I was just going to say maybe the next slide will help, because repository is outside of the DBOM. So let's say an entity has already a repository that wants to share information with a set of customers of product. So they will create the agent, if it doesn't exist, for that type of repository. Then They will have an instantiate, of course, the DBOM, which the repository is that database. Then for the other entities, they just, and then the source will set up the channels, the channel that others can subscribe to. The other entities, they just need to set up a DBOM node and instantiate a DBOM node and then subscribe to that channel. So the data still reside in the main place, but the channels provide the rules around the access to that data. So the other DBOMs don't need to, I mean, they can copy paste information to other databases, but they can just use their DBOM to access the data in the main repository. And I think one of the slides show that actually, how that works.
Okay, I'll wait till I get through the slides.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. So this whole DBOM node actually creates this abstraction called the channel on top of the repository. Each channel is hosted by one DBOM node. It can store structured JSON data within assigned JSON envelope. It has one or more subscribers with a well-defined access policy. So like, can this remote DBOM node read? Can it write? Can it read audit entries, which is essentially the version control for a given attestation? Each channel is optionally associated with one or more notaries. So essentially everything on the channel will be verifiable. So if you put an attestation on a channel, you'll be able to verify that attestation was indeed created at a given point in time by a given identity, unambiguously, whether or not you're using DBOM. So again, you can do that manually, or you have your DBOM node do it for you. Roy, you have.
Could I ask what signing technology you're using here?
Sorry?
What signing format are you
For
using?
signing, we're using PGP.
On top of what? Cozy?
So we have. So we're just signing a JSON payload and then storing the signature and then also notarizing it simultaneously.
I'm not too sure that quite answered what I wanted, but okay, let's continue.
Yeah, maybe in the end we can dig into that. So it also creates an unambiguous namespace for attestation. So since every DBOM node essentially exists as a service that is reachable under a specific DNS entry, let's say node1.attestations.unisys.com, every single channel and every single attestation on a channel has a specific identity that can be reached. Essentially, it has a URI. So in order to, I guess it's going, an organization instantiates a DBOM node, instantiates the repository, sets up channels, invites their partners to subscribe to these channels, and then you can integrate it with your tooling. And once that's done, you can record, retrieve, and audit attestations. So essentially, you have, let's say, multiple partners, partner X, Y, and Z. You can set up, each partner can have their own DBOM node. They can set up channels between them. So in this case, partner X has set up a channel where they're distributing the SBOMs, hardware bombs, VEXs, VDRs, etc., to multiple partners downstream. And you can imagine this being scaled up to many suppliers interacting across the supply chain, having access to various channels across the supply chain. So essentially, what it's trying to do is what you would traditionally do with email or any other communication medium when you're actually requesting SBOMs or VEXs or VDRs or any attestations. We move that communication over to DBOM nodes by establishing channels that pre-approve sort of the level of access that you have to these attestations. And you're able to publish and retrieve these attestations using your DBOM node's identity across the supply chain. So in this case, for example, the supplier has one channel that spans across the manufacturer and the customer and anything that's downstream, where they can put in SBOMs, CVEs, etc. So yes, Dick.
Yeah, thanks again, Amit. So could you go back to the previous slide, please? I have a question.
Yeah.
So I'm looking at the channel concept, and it looks like there's a channel for H-bomb and a channel for S-bomb. Does that mean that a channel is specific to a single type of attestation, or can a single channel be used for multiple types of attestation?
It's up to how you. We don't have. It's not opinionated as such. We do have a field that allows you to specify the schema per asset, so per attestation essentially. So you can put in all your S-bombs, CVs, and H-bombs into one channel. Let's say you could create channels based on your products, right? Let's say you're releasing 5 products. You could segment your channels by products. You could segment them by any other form of organization that you want to. But we don't have it.
Okay, so if I'm a consumer and I have, let's say, 10 suppliers, right? They're going to be sending me different types of attestations. They may send me an S-bomb, but they may send me a vulnerability disclosure report. So I would want to treat the VDRs as a higher priority artifact or attestation because it could represent some risk to me. So is there a way to say, prioritize this payload, but not that one?
Yes. So as you receive things from a channel, as you subscribe to the channel, or as your tool subscribes to the channel, like each the envelope around the actual attestation body contains a field to specify the schema URL, which is essentially a web link or a DBOM, another DBOM attestation that contains a JSON schema. So let's say it's an SPDX file, right? It would have the well-known schema URI of SPDX 2.2 or SPDX 2.3. Similarly, if you're going for a VEX or BDR, it would link to JSON schema, well-known JSON schema for that specific type of attestation. So you're able to filter by that and parse accordingly.
Okay, thank you, Amit. I appreciate that.
I think maybe
yeah, just to add to Amit saying that, but for every record that is recorded on the channel, the subscribers of that channel will get a notification that something was just recorded on the channel. So they are notified and they can make a decision how to treat those information.
I believe Ray also has.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, yeah, thank you. So the idea is that everybody that's involved in this has to have a DBOM machine running at all times for it to work. And
No,
looks
so
like
channels.
Everybody has a node. Is that right?
Yeah, everyone must have a node, but it's not just a streaming architecture. Channels are both a store as well as a stream. So you can you can have a DBOM node go down, go back up. Doesn't have to be listening in all the time. It can still query things that have been created after the fact when it was not listening. But yeah, essentially every participant is running a DBOM node, which is just a set of microservices.
So what about lightweight suppliers and lightweight customers? I mean, a lot of suppliers are not these heavyweight, companies. They might be just a software, a little software shop somewhere that makes one little thingy, and the customer might be an end user or something. I mean, not such a heavyweight that would have the DBOM node. And I'm also worried with this architecture about fragility, because if you require that everything is running and the APIs are all up and running, and you got all your microservices running and all that, I find this is very fragile, and it means everything has to be running for it to work, versus some sort of static data methodology where you don't have to be running for it to work. You can just go out and check some data, check some receipts somewhere. Anyway, that's kind of what I'm seeing here, and I'm a little bit worried about that. Thanks.
All right, yeah, that it is true that all the nodes, the node that you're retrieving the information from, unless you mirrored that information and you were subscribed ahead of time, and you're mirroring that information, the node must be running to retrieve it. But in case you did, you do have mirroring turned on, and you have all the data available from the upstream, you can still retrieve it in that specific case. And going back to the key values, it helps you decouple your attestations from your artifacts, create channels with configurable sharing policies. Oh, sorry, I think I missed Neil.
I was interested by your analogy to email, and I guess what I put in the chat is a response to Ray. It sounds like everyone who produces software would have to associate themselves with a DBOM node, but you can farm that out to somebody else the way that people don't run. I mean, we used to run our own email servers, but people farm that out. So I'm assuming that it's going to be easy for people to associate themselves with folks that want to run that infrastructure.
Yeah, that is true. Since we don't really provide a SaaS around it, we do have like a prototype thing, but like we don't really provide that as consumable service yet, so didn't really mention it. But again, yeah, it is amenable to like being put around like a SaaS-like setup where you have multiple tenancy and you just subscribe and you create your own DBOM nodes within software as a service offering. Just that there's no piece of the open source that does that. So yeah, you can create channels with configurable sharing policies. You get encryption in transit and at rest. Essentially, DBOM node to DBOM node federation communications run over HTTPS with mutual certificate with MTLS essentially. And at rest, the repository offers encryption. And in terms of trust, you can cryptographically sign your attestations. You can notarize changes to attestations and transparency logs and distributed ledgers so that you can verify those out of band, as well as the DBOM node can also do the verification, but you can verify them yourselves. You can have an audit log for every change and retrieval operation, since everything goes through the DBOM infrastructure. And you can independently verify the truthfulness of these attestations, whether they were created at a specific time by a specific identity. A DBOM node then becomes that one place where you can subscribe to multiple channels on multiple nodes across multiple vendors, and you're getting stuff in a specific format that allows you to streamline the way that you integrate that DBOM node into your systems, so that you can have one single place where all your upstream supplier information flows in, and you can query it in the same way. Again, standardized APIs. So everything that happens on a DBOM node is put out onto a asynchronous queue. So you can imagine up any integration. So what if you want to automatically connect to every customer that's already within your CRM? Right? You could connect it in the CRM, listen for events whenever channel establishment requests come in, and then automatically onboard your downstream customers or their customers. You can also integrate this into your CM systems. You can integrate into your systems that absorb this SBOM content, this text content, and make sense of it. For example, Google's Guac project, which aims to pull in all these attestations and make them queryable and usable for policy decisions. The integration with popular tools, being able to publish stuff off of dependency track, being able to publish in toto attestations and verify them without needing to share the in toto bundles alongside the artifacts, all those pieces. And unambiguous namespacing of attestation, since everything is essentially, every DBOM node has a DNS address that is unambiguous. You can reference each attestation and each channel without running into issues around DBOM v2 Alpha. DBOM v1 was open source in 2020. There are several proofs of concepts that have been conducted both inside and outside Unisys. The v2 architecture was created based on the requirements gathered from these POCs. The v2 implementation is now in progress with an alpha release available. Try out v2 by heading to the alpha branch of the deployments repositories. Links at the end of the presentation. Now, use case and POCs, again, I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but this is the in toto POC where, every step of the way, whether you have development across the org or like across within the same organization, you can have discrete DBOM nodes publish in toto attestations over a specific channel, and you're able to actually in toto verify and in toto attest throughout the supply chain and ensure that everything before the current step has indeed happened, has been indeed attested to, and can be retrieved and verified. So again, you could also ship some of these in toto attestations over to the consumer in order to so that they also have access to an audit trail. Again, depends on how you have it structured. There is a link to a demo that I'll not go over here. There's the VEX plus SBOM POCs, where we've just shared VEX documents as well as software bills of materials generated from continuous integration infra, and sent that over to various downstream customers in order to, and connected that to a bunch of tooling, like for example, dependency track, in order to seamlessly integrate with the rest of the tooling that scans for vulnerabilities, monitors SBOMs, etc. Yes, Neil.
Going back just a bit, so you talked about, I think it sounded like you had URIs that are based on kind of your federated approach. And I'm just wondering if somebody changes a provider, if I start off and I'm running, if I'm publishing things via one particular DBOM node, and then I decide to change, or there's a consolidation or whatever, how do you have a way to find out, who's signing for it now and where I would find it now and what happens to all the old signatures? And I don't know, just like, how does the federation deal with movement like that?
So as you do move, let's say you have to re-authenticate nodes, essentially similar to how you set up a new SSH key, right? So when the identity changes, you do have to reauthorize the node, because there isn't any switch over sort of process where you can cross sign the previous certificate, at least not as of yet. And when URIs change, we don't currently have a redirect approach that allows you to remap like areas like, for instance, you just mentioned consolidation, right? What if you consolidate multiple channels into one, or if you consolidate attestations across to one? We don't really have a way to map that right now, but it has come up in the past.
Yeah, to just their part was every the subscriber to a channel, to a private channel, they are aware who are the other subscribers. So when you move it, you can decide which ones also to ask them to subscribe to the new DBOM channel.
I think Dick has a question as well.
Yeah, and if I promise this will be my last one.
This is a discussion. I mean,
yes. Well, it's been a while since we've chatted about DBOM, so I'm still catching up from the past. One of the things that I know we deal with all the time at REA is that you receive different types of odd artifacts. Like in SBOM's case, that can be SPDX, or it can be CycloneDX. It can be different formats. The same is true at VEX. You can get an open VEX format, you can get a CSAF VEX format, you can get a CycloneDX VEX format. So is there something in DBOM that can help a receiver know what type of information they have received so they'll know how to process it?
Yeah, that goes back. So we fall upon JSON schema essentially to deal with that. So wait one sec. I think I can pull in an image that will help. So one sec. Google Docs isn't cooperating. Yeah. Is the window on top visible, or did I just share the individual window?
We'll just make it bigger.
Yeah, the floating window is there.
Yeah. So okay, that's not what I intended. Okay, never mind. So within the asset envelope, there is a link to the schema itself. For example, this is the link to well-known schema for SPDX version 2.3.1. So as long as you can link to a JSON schema, your whatever client application is consuming these attestations can actually resolve that schema and figure out what exactly this is. Now, here in this case, by looking at the schema, I can tell you that it is SPDX v2.3.1 schema because they do have well-known URLs for those. But in some cases, you may be hosting your own schema, but the details are in the JSON schema itself that specify what type of asset it is. But essentially, you have a guarantee that if you have a schema URL here, the body will be following that. The attestation body will be following that schema. So essentially, you're able to figure out is it 2.3.1 SPDX, is it Cyclone DX of this version, so on and so forth.
Okay, so the schema URL needs to be parsed in order to know what type of payload you're dealing with. So if it's an OpenVex format or if it's a CSAFX format, you would
Yes.
judge that based on this schema?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yep. And that also sort of allows you to put in custom schemas. So for example, for hardware bills of materials, there's no real standard as such, right? Like we have SPDX and Cyclone DX. So your organization may be using something that's bespoke. So in that case, the schema URL need not be a web URL, but could also be a DBOM URL. And by DBOM URL, what I essentially mean is something like this. So this is URI to a specific channel, right? So like you'd have DBOM, which is basically HTTPS over a specific port. You have the URL, which can be resolved thanks to DNS, and you're able to get to a channel. Similarly, you can tack on asset and get to a specific attestation.
Thanks very much.
And again, the design details are available on the GitHub project, and I won't go in deep into it because in the interest of time. So like this is an upcoming POC, DBOM and Guac. So as I mentioned, Guac is something that allows you to make sense of all these attestations, how they're related. So basically say that, okay, does this software depend on something that has a high vulnerability at any level? So Guac helps you answer those questions. So DBOM can, we are going to do a POC where DBOM is essentially going to act as an ingest for Guac, where you get all your upstream SBOMs, your VEX reports, and Guac strings them together, and you're able to do policy queries on them. Again, this is something that's in development and not available right now. DBOM and SCITT, again, this is super high level. Again, correct me if I'm wrong here, and they're very high level suggestions on how we can contribute. Again, DBOM channels can store and distribute SCITT objects by serializing them into attestations. These attestations. So currently, I saw that there is like a SCITT ledger, like an e-notary that has been implemented. That could be added in as a DBOM notary as well. So if we have CBOR and JSON interop, where we can serialize those things to CBOR, and you can perform COSI signing essentially and put that on the e-notary. That's one way we could integrate. Essentially on the right, if you look at it, DBOMs essentially give you weight to identity with XY09 certificates. So you could do did DBOM or you could do did web as well. We support that as well. Again, that's currently not open source, but that's something that we built out. And claims and evidences, those SCITT objects can be attestations that are stored on DBOM. But essentially, I get that you guys like SCITT is currently using CBOR, and we are using JSON essentially as the serialization format. And we need to like sort of look into that and figure that out. I think I saw a hand raised, but I think I lost it. Roy.
This is exactly what we thought SCITT would be used for, was to back in for something like this, like the DBOM. I like your presentation. There's some questions about how to do offline and so forth, and some of the ones that Ray brought up, I think can be answered. There's this question of, does all information have to be in the store, or just a placeholder saying, here's where you go to get the real data, and you can be secondary permissions. I think that would work here as well. The intersection with guac and some of the other higher level abstractions, yes, those are concerns for me as well. But I think if we were going to do this, we potentially want to engage the CVE community into the same pipeline to make it consistent. It seems odd to get the SBOMs and the VEXs off of one channel and the CVEs off another.
It may be that you have several like again it's in a perfect world everyone would be putting out SBOMs and VEXs and whatnot, right? But we're sort of envisioning like an intermediary layer where like you have these third-party providers that provide SBOMs, but however you do have vulnerability disclosures being put out by organizations. So you could have adapters that do publish those things on DBOM channels in the interim while the infrastructure goes around and gets adopted. So that was more of the thought there.
The complexity that I see is all the OSS or library packages are going to be put on all their, how do you know where the definitive one is for each of them to link it together? You're going to be making requests. So do you think a DBOM is more like a DNS client cache, or that it'll go off and do the appropriate queries to follow the chain? And is that a guac function, or is that something you think belongs in DBOM?
Yeah, you could have DBOM as sort of proxy there. We had an experiment done with pearls, right? Where like you could have universal Perl retrieval of the source repository. Again, pearls are not everywhere. Right now, it doesn't work for everything. But essentially, it's a Perl retriever written as a repository agent. So essentially, GitHub becomes like that one channel. It becomes an accessible channel from any DBOM node, and you're able to Perl retrieve the source code based on the Perl resolution. But again, that was like a very experimental thing. And as you know, it sounds hacky.
How did the experiment? Did you not see just a whole smear of traffic? Like you're reaching out to 100 different spots for 100 different documents. Isn't that going to be a problem?
Yeah, that's essentially the same thing that we ran into.
Yeah, that's what I was concerned about. That's why I'm wondering whether we kind of need a cache store and forward system on something like a DBOM.
Yeah, and that's sort of one part of the mirror piece, right? Like what happens if a remote DBOM node that is subscribed to goes offline? So essentially, when subscribed DBOM node should be able to mirror all the contents of all the channels that it is connected to at the moment, so that even when those remote DBOM nodes are offline and your entitlements are unavailable, you're still able to retrieve them on the fly. Obviously, it'll be marked as being cached and retrieved from your own node. However, the notarization should still resolve given that they are notarized on a third-party external notary. But yeah, point taken on the on the risks of having like a federated infrastructure. And then I think same trade-off comes with any federated infrastructure. Like for example, even if you take something like Mastodon, you have one instance going down. All the content on that instance, unless mirrored by another instance, is like not available while the piece is down.
Right. So, we can build something that allows single retrieval of documents. My concern here is that is going to fall on its face pretty quickly with all the network traffic, that we probably have to do some of these higher level constructs. Now, I'll let Steve chime in here.
I'm sorry, I'm late. I was just getting checked in after a flight, so I missed the first half of the presentation. But what I'm hearing is the package manager distribution problem of yet another service. Like, is this another service? Are you leveraging existing storage and package manager services? Because the thing I was looking for is DBOM of doc format, or it's a service, or both.
It's a service.
Okay. Yeah, I guess I have all the same questions that we normally have with package managers and distribution services. Is there expect to be one global service, or customers expected to host their own for private storage and for all of the performance, reliability, security boundaries? But with 3 minutes left, I didn't want to crack open that conversation. So maybe I could just ping you offline and talk more about it. Understand more
sure.
what you're thinking about it.
Yeah, thanks, Steve.
Henk?
That's a good time check for us. I'd like to let Henk in because he's patiently got his hand up. But I think unless there's anything burning, this should be the last question, please. And then Amit, if you want to wrap up, I'll give you all the time. So I'll thank you very much for the presentation now, and you can take the remaining 2.5 minutes with Henk. Thanks very much.
Oh, thank you, John. Hi, this is Hank. Parting words, apparently. Thank you for all your insights here. That's actually really helpful. We are literally, maybe you have caught wind of that at the beginning of the meeting. We are in the middle of a categorization problem. And as you highlighted, there is this bucketing categorization of, you call it attestations, you call it statements, yada, yada, potato, potato. Charlie asked the right question, is this a artifact or is it an attestation about artifact? So doesn't matter in the core, we have to categorize these statements / attestations. And we are in the middle of trying to do that in the feed structure challenge we accepted here, so to speak. And maybe we can cross-pollinate here on this topic, because if this is still an open item for you, and you can improve on the categorization of the statements you want to notarize, we also want to have that. And if that is something we can semantically learn from each other, I think that's already one step towards interoperability.
Yes, I agree. Absolutely agree.
Wonderful, because then we have a common problem, and that's always good. Thanks.
Yep. I'll send over this deck to Mehdi as well, so that you can get access to the links. Of course, you can't click on them here, right? We do have a community Slack that we monitor. Again, feel free to email us too. That works too. But if you want a more message experience, there is Slack. The V2 alpha is there. Again, it's an alpha. It comes with all the warnings of an alpha, but feel free to try it out. We'd love for people to test it out. dworm.io, there's a website there detailing the same things that we just talked about. And special thanks to the Unisys team for code contributions, documentation, and marketing materials around dworm. Well, I think that's all I have. I think I see a message. Is that a message?
Perfect. Well, thank you again very much. Good use of time, I think. So just enough time to say for all the regulars, we do have our thing set up. Finally, I've pressed the right buttons to get our weeklies in. So next week might be another guest presentation. If it isn't, we've got plenty of PRs and issues from an editorial review of the architecture last week that we'll go through. So see you all next week, and look forward to whichever of those two things happens.
Thank you for the presentation. Appreciate it.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks. Take care.